All right, looks like we're ready to go. Howdy, everybody. My name is Christy McKinley, and I serve as the National Conservation Desktop Team Lead on the Conservation Planning Branch. Before we get started, we'll do a little housekeeping. The Teams live event allows us to share one-way video and audio with you. If you'd like to turn on the closed captions, select your captions, subtitles on, and your video controls. If you need to pause the meeting, click the pause button that's found in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. You can then click the button again to play from where you left off or jump to real time by clicking live, and that's located next to the play button. Finally, we are recording the session in case you experience technical difficulties and for anyone that's not able to attend today's live event. You will be able to access the recording after the conclusion of the event by clicking the same link used to join the meeting, and we will also post the videos, questions and answers, and slides to the We Are NRCS SharePoint site. Now let's move on to today's forum. This is the second topic in our three-part series. It's open to everyone to learn more about desktop and CART. We're pleased to announce we had over 2,800 participants attend the Mapping 101 forum in August. Today's topic is CART geospatial ranking capabilities. You may hear things that are new or different in your state, and if you have questions, please reach out to your local business tools or technology specialist. But the ability for states to integrate geospatial data into CART ranking first starts with a commitment from your state leadership to identify resource concern priorities and data sources that can be used in your state for completing program ranking. Today, you're going to learn about how CART assessment data is used in ranking, the best practices to configure geospatial data for ranking, how Kansas uses geospatial ranking questions, and then what national data is available, as well as our fiscal year 25 ranking timeline and any new features coming out. Now I'd like to turn it over to Jerry Rayner, Director of NRCS Financial Assistance Programs Division.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I know we've got a diversity of folks online today. Want to welcome everyone to the CD CART user forum covering geospatial ranking questions. So as we come off of or we wind down here, we've got about a week left to close out FY24. But as you know, CART ranking is the agency's primary ranking tool for all Farm Bill programs. So it's going to be very important. This is an important topic to be discussing now as we're on the cusp of FY25 and program rollout. But for FY24, just to kind of set the stage here for how these tools are able to impact our ability to do conservation planning and ranking of our applications and practices. FY24, there have been over 300,000 ranked assessments completed in CART. And with that, the results are, and those rankings resulted in over 56,000 contracts. $3.7 billion being obligated, 177 million of that has already been paid to producers, covering over 29 million acres. So those are just the results of those 307,000 ranked assessments. We know going into fiscal year 25, we've got a lot bigger task in front of us, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act funding, the number of contracts, the number of assessments. We know all of those things are going to be increasing. So how do we prepare our staff for the challenge ahead of them, but also working at ways to become more efficient and effective when it comes to ranking. So configuring geospatial ranking questions allows national and state program managers the ability to develop system answered questions that do not add extra time to the field staff, which is key. We always want to try and develop tools that will take workload off the plate of our field staff. And this is one that can do that. I've been a part of some demonstrations. I think it's going to be worth each of you taking the opportunity to really listen closely and learn how these tools are being used, how these layers are providing some efficiency within other states. But most importantly, consider how some of these techniques can be applied within your state. That's going to be very important. Again, we know what we're faced with going into FY25. Take a look at the techniques that are being shared with you, and if you are able to incorporate those into your FY fiscal year ranking, I think we're going to have a greater level of success, efficiency when it comes to program delivery. Again, welcome to the session. Pay close attention, learn a lot of things that are going to be shared with you today, and you'll have the opportunity to revisit this session. Ask any questions. There's going to be opportunity for you to do that as well. So thank you for joining. Again, and I have to go all the way back to the beginning. I'm not sure if everyone knows, but I am Jerry Rayner. My name was shared earlier. I'm the Financial Assistance Program Division Director here in National Headquarters. So thank you for the opportunity to kind of brief you and welcome you to this session. Now I'll turn it over to Eric McTaggart, who's the Acting Conservation Planning Branch Chief. Eric?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jerry. So to kick off this session, the first aspect that we wanted to touch on is within the CART assessment, how that data is going to be used in ranking. You know, here we are to learn about the geospatial capabilities built into ranking, but that journey really begins with the digitization of our planning land units and conservation desktop, as represented in that center map view there with the outlined land units. And this begins the building blocks that ranking is going to use. In our CS, as we know, we're always providing that one-on-one personalized assistance when our field staff is out there working with those unique situations with each client, whether that uniqueness is encompassed with their operation, how they manage their type of operation compared to their neighbor through management practices, whether that is also built on the location of that land, and then just the characteristics of those soils and the climate that all make up that one-on-one personalized experience as we're developing the conservation plans. We begin to all geospatially tie that information to those POUs as we do the documentation and evaluation through the CART assessment. So as we were developing CART, you know, we wanted to make sure that, you know, what that information is that you all are gathering from the field level and associating to those POUs was captured for the assessment purpose to analyze the resource concerns, to understand their existing and their planned condition, but then not just to stop there, but to allow that information then to persist and be carried forward into ranking. So as we look at the 5 ranking pool evaluation areas, those components, you know, 3 of those are going to be carried forward from the assessment on those, you know, individual land units, and then provide a prioritization for funding. And those 3 out of the 5 that come from the assessment are vulnerability, your planned practice, effects, and efficiency. But before we go into detail into those, which we will hear in subsequent slides, let's talk a little bit more about what is captured in the assessment to kind of set the stage. So as you all are doing your work and documenting the situation on the landscape, you're capturing the land use and the modifiers, those land use modifiers, and you're going to hear Jenna speak about how ranking pools are configured in the near future. And those are going to be some of those factors that your state program managers are going to help set. Resource concerns and their thresholds. There's some geospatial capability that we're going to touch on that are set for our dynamic thresholds. Again, going to have influence on our ranking outcome. Resource inventory, that's where we're going to evaluate that existing condition based on a series of questions. So you're going to be able to set what is that existing condition? How much risk is still out there, or vulnerability, which is one of those ranking factors. Existing practices, again, going to kind of set that as is condition. Plan practices, what kind of environmental impact or effect are those plan practices going to have on those resource concerns that you identified, is going to be captured through our conservation assessment practice points database that's running behind the scenes to help in the evaluation. And then results, kind of touched on those in my previous comments, but that existing condition, plan condition, where are we currently on the landscape as the stewardship level for a resource concern, and what level are we going to take it to? Another piece geospatially you may not think of is those planner overrides. As you all in the field provide those planner overrides, we geospatially know where those are located per resource concern that you're overriding, which also will influence how we make adjustments to the assessment methodology and the evaluation of the resource concerns, and then will ultimately have downstream impact. So again, just how that geospatial understanding that we have built in this system feeds back into adjustments we are going to make, and then ultimately impact the ranking for you all. So let's talk a little bit about some of that geospatial content that's in the analysis of our resource concerns. I mentioned it on the previous slide, but those thresholds. So we have two types of thresholds. We have standard thresholds, which have a value of 50. So you can kind of think of that as, is the resource concern there, or is it not? So think something like classic gully, either the planning land unit that's visibly seen that there's a classic gully, or there's not. So it's kind of like a yes/no scenario. Other types of thresholds are known as dynamic thresholds. So they have variability based on site specific information that's geospatially understood. So your soils information, susceptibility to erosion, climate information like rainfall data, climate data as far as total precipitation that may be in a different geographical area compared to another. All that analysis is running in the background, which will ultimately feed into the vulnerability that we will cover here momentarily. Another piece of geospatial content and analysis of our resource concerns comes in the impact of our resource concerns. So here is a specific question on your screen for organic matter depletion. On the left-hand side is just the view of the configuration that we do here at National Headquarters to set up the web service to go get the results in reference to the PLUs in your assessment. And then that will trigger, different resource concern evaluation questions that'll be tiered off of that. Sometimes these web service questions will have numerical values in the evaluation of the resource concern. Other examples, like the one you see in front of you, will trigger conditional questions that are relevant to your geographical area that you are evaluating, that you will answer as a user. So again, uniqueness based on geographical understanding of where you're working and the metadata in the geospatial layers that you are impacting or crossing with those PLU boundaries. So that's a little bit of information on what's going on behind the scenes geospatially in the assessment. So let's understand how that then is translated and carried from the assessment over to ranking through those three factors I mentioned on an earlier slide. So the first one is vulnerability. So this is the difference between that existing condition, those resource inventory questions you're answering, and existing practices from the threshold for a given resource concern. So you can see just a visualization of the threshold minus our existing condition and practices, or that existing condition that you see, or existing total you see on the results screen grab, that will equal vulnerability. So in this example, sheet and rill erosion, we have a threshold of 40. This would be one of our dynamic thresholds. And then we have an existing total of 20. So existing condition again, based on those answers that you were provided on the resource inventory page. And then existing practices would be practices that are out on the landscape that you have noted in CART, and those points that are behind the scenes to give that value of a total of 20. So those 20 vulnerability points would be carried forward into ranking. Jenna will touch on the configuration. So if your ranking pool is configured to address sheet and rill erosion, it's a priority for that ranking pool to evaluate that. These 20 points would become influential in the total ranking score. Each one of those resource concerns has a % weight, so the level of importance that the state's giving to ultimately give a final ranking score. The next one would be that plan practice effect, so a measure of the benefits towards addressing a resource concern with the plan practice, which is applicable to the ranking pool. As you are probably all well aware, we set up parameters of the ranking pool to be to provide funding for particular resource, or I should say plan practices. So in this case, we have 30 plan practice points that are going to address sheet and rill erosion. Again, those 30 practice points that are in the assessment based on maybe you did some cover crops, maybe we did some terraces, and those combined have a value of 30 points. As they carry forward into ranking, those 30 points will again become one of those categories of the 5 ranking factors. And then lastly, efficiency. This is one of those 5 ranking factors. It's defining how well your plan practices within a ranking pool address the resource concerns in relations to the cost to implement the practice. There's no work on your end to do. Our national discipline leads, national economists, and others have worked behind the scenes to define that efficiency. There's math that goes on behind the scenes, and then that information is based on those plan practices that you have in the assessment and those that are applicable to the ranking pool. But other than that, it's all taken care of for you, and that value will show in the ranking score as a total. And then with that, I will turn it over to Jenna to give us some background of CART and some of those best use of geospatial data for ranking. So take it away, Jenna.
Thank you, Eric. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jenna Moore. I'm a natural resource specialist with the policy branch of the Financial Assistance Programs Division. Today, I'll be sharing some background information about CART and some additional updates towards the end. Next slide. So CART is our decision support system. It's designed to directly and consistently transfer that assessment data that Eric was just explaining, along with the client decisions related to the practices that they intend to adopt to avoid duplication, increase prioritization on critical areas based on the geospatial priorities and site-specific data for that site, and provide better outcomes and a framework for continuous improvement. CART ranks assessments in multiple ranking pools as applicable to offer the most opportunity for clients and to help prioritize workload toward those who are likely to score highest and receive funding. With CART's configurability, it allows states to incorporate state-specific criteria into the ranking process through the development and implementation of specific ranking pools. These are customizable with geospatial and planner data and should allow for effective prioritization of program delivery. Ranking process with the national program managers establishing the national parameters for each program and/or initiative through the creation and management of ranking templates and the issuance of ranking pool guidance. For each template, users have the ability to view or export the template criteria set. Program managers can use the action menu to create a new pool. And I gave a screenshot there to kind of give you an example of how to get to these items. You also have the ability to export the template if you would like to have a hard copy of it for reference as you're building your ranking pools. This is important because this will be one of the changes with the ranking guidance coming forth this year. We'll no longer have the template exhibits attached with that instruction. Program managers, again, you have the ability to create a ranking pool from this step on the ranking template page of the application, or you can use the ranking pool page from the home screen. Next. Ranking pool creation within the parameters that are set by the national ranking template should be based on state identified priorities and incorporate your locally led input. The customizable aspects are your land uses and modifiers, your resource concern categories and the resource concerns that fall beneath, your conservation practices, ranking weights, with which Eric just explained. 3 of those factors do come over from the assessment, but you will have defined min and max ranges to stay within that are set at the template level. So be mindful as you set those weights to give priority to those factors that you want to have the most deference. Excuse me. And the display group is the final piece of setting up your ranking pool. But I do want to remind you that when you are setting up these pools, remember that the land use and modifiers, the resource concerns, and the practices that you determine or select for your pool are part 1 of your matching process. So only assessments that meet that criteria set will be able to match to the pool. The second part is the geospatial matching, which will be identified and established when you create your display group. Entered value that you use for your resource concern categories must be equal to or fall within that min and max range values that are set by the template. For example, if you have a minimum value of 0 and the weight percentage for that category is 0, just keep in mind that no points from that that area are going to be included when the ranking scores are calculated for the assessment, because we have identified that there is no impact, no benefit. So we'll go to the next one. So the display group is set up it's a set of 4 question types: your applicability, your category, program, and resource priorities. And I'll go into detail about applicability and category as we go forward. But each of these sections are required to have a question. The applicability and category sections are limited to a single question. And before you publish your display group, I do advise, we always caution each time we give one of these trainings, that you please test it in the training environment to ensure that you are seeing what you intend to see, that you're matching the assessments to your pool that you're intending to match, and that the geospatial questions that you've developed are being answered as you intend for them to be answered. We do have another tip that for your naming of your display group, keep it consistent with your ranking pool so that it'll be easy to reference at a later time, as well as it is beneficial to also include your state and your fiscal year in the pool name. Fiscal year is not necessary, but we have found that it can be beneficial to indicate to users that, hey, this is what I need to be ranking in. Once you're satisfied with your testing in the training environment, you can come back to the production environment, publish your display group, activate your ranking pool, and go forth and do great work. Next. Okay. The applicability question is the last step in the matching process. So after we've gone through the initial matching to see if our practices and land use and resource concerns meet the pool, we've gone through the geospatial matching step. Now we have the applicability question. If this question is a geospatial question, it will be easy for the user because it will identify them to proceed forward with the ranking pool. But if it is not, if it's text-based, the user will have to answer it and save before they can go forward. So that's why we always encourage geospatial. But we do, how it is answered will determine whether that assessment can go forward. So keep that in mind as you're considering what that question will be, and hopefully you'll make it meaningful for you. Again, this must be a single question, and we do encourage it that it be geospatial. It does help to reduce clicks for the user. It also offers time savings for them. Applicability could be as small as the green box in our picture there, or it could be a watershed area or some other boundary area, such as the red that's indicated in the photo. Or you could even go as broad as the entire state, which is identified by the yellow boundary line. But just wanted to show this as an example that there are no limitations on how you can establish your applicability. Is determined based on how you want to fine tune that ranking pool for what you want to allow to match to it. And next we'll look at land unit qualification. All right, so when you're setting up your questions, determining how you want that land unit to qualify is going to be very important. The geospatial-based applicability looks at the planned land units for the evaluation. And when you select any as your land unit qualification, this will allow for any of the land units in your assessment when they're being evaluated. If any one of just that matches the geospatial definition that you've set for that question, then all of the land units in that assessment will be able to participate in ranking. Alternatively, there is an option to select all. Should you select all, you now have restricted the evaluation to only allow those land units that satisfy that geospatial requirement to be able to participate in the ranking pool. And I have some examples here on the next couple slides. So here's an example of the any qualification. We have about 7 land units in our assessment here, and the shaded area is our geospatial layer. So since at least one of those land units is in the area, all of our land units are going to pass through and be able to be ranked in that ranking pool. So we'll go to next. For the all qualification, with the same assessment, only fields 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7 actually fall within the layer or the shaded area. We do have the possibility, depending on how that question is set up, if it is an intersect type geospatial question, then 6 would come in and be able to be evaluated in the ranking pool. However, field 5 would remain out. But if you use percent intersect and set it at a high value, 6 would not make the cut. And then we would only have those 5 land units that would be coming in and 2 staying out. And that would be indicated in your applicability details report once you finish your ranking. Okay. So some commonly used geospatial definitions, I kind of talked about them just briefly there with that example, but you do have intersect, which is going to basically look at, does this land unit cross my boundary layer at any point? And so that would allow that field to come into play. For the intersect percentage, that planned land unit would have to intersect the boundary layer or the analysis layer based off of whatever that percentage is that you established when you built your ranking pool. So if it's 25%, then 25% of that field or that land unit would need to intersect with that layer. Otherwise, it would be excluded. And then the buffer, it is basically looking at, does this planned land unit intersect within the buffer distance that's established when when the geospatial definition was set up. And I do want to remind everyone that as you are reviewing your ranking pools for the year, Also take time to review your layers. Make sure that your end date will not end prior to the fiscal year you're intending to use that ranking pool. If it does, it creates a lot of heartburn for you and me. No, and your users. No, but seriously, if a layer happens to end before the fiscal year, before you're done ranking, it does have some very negative impacts for your users. It could result in the need to re-rank. It could result in the need to build a new ranking pool and make sure that you're getting similar results so that we're keeping the process fair. Okay. And so with this slide here, I just wanted to share as an example, when we're looking at geospatial layers for applicability, it's always good to stick to one attribute or one boundary. If you fail to dissolve interior boundaries, it will confuse the system and it doesn't know what to pick, so you may not get the results you're expecting. For this example, if your application is in the source water protection area, you want a data layer that has a overall source water protection area, not one that has numerous polygons in it, because the tool doesn't know which one's the right one. So do keep that in mind as you're provisioning your data. Okay. So our next section in the display group is the category. Through this section, we do like to use this to group our like applications. This is kind of what we use as our bucket of funds. So if I'm in Team 3, I may want to have a set aside pot of money for all applications in Team 3 versus Team 4. And so this allows us to do this. We can have a single question with a single answer, which I show there in the example on your top right, or you can allow for multiple answers in the example in the bottom right. The multiple answers is beneficial to help with pool consolidation, things to keep in mind if you are to use this functionality. If you're going to allow multiple answers for a category question, be sure that all of your questions are the same, because if you're going to be trying to use conditions and things like that, you may not see the results that you're intending, because although we are allowing for this record to be considered in multiple categories, it is a single record and it will share a single score. So I always advertise it as being beneficial for your HU categories if you wanted to group those ranking pools, because usually they all have the exact same questions, and so they're going to have the same end result when you rank them. So be cautious when using it, but do take advantage of it if you can find benefit in it. Next. Okay, and this is the category example. So unlike the applicability, we do want to see those interior boundaries, because this gives us our differentiation in our layer analysis to help us determine where those land units should be considered and evaluated. Okay. And so we always share this as best management practices, our best tips, tricks that you can use as you're building your ranking pools. Be sure that if you're using geospatial data, again, make sure you're testing. But we do encourage that we use geospatial data for category questions as well, because it does help to speed the process up for the user and reduce the need to answer multiple questions that could be addressed otherwise. Be sure that you're developing your category questions so that the answers are meaningful. This is beneficial because when we get over to SAT, seeing yes or no as a category name doesn't really help when we're making decisions about which should be funded. Having names that are clear and indicative of what we're trying to fund does help us to keep track of funds and also make sure that we are making selections in the correct category. So categories are used to separate applications, as we discussed before. Keep that in mind, that you want to make sure that you keep the competition fair, and we're considering applications that really should be competing against each other as you establish those. And as far as conditionality questions or using conditional questions, do not set a applicability question to be conditional on a category. And if you are going to use conditions for the category section, you can build program and ranking questions or resource questions off of it. Okay. And then we do have two more geospatial definitions that we can discuss. The contains is basically evaluating whether a feature is within the land unit in the assessment. This type can only be used for program or resource questions. Do not use it for applicability or category. And the contained is looking at whether that land unit is fully within a feature of a layer. And you can use this for any question type. So if you find benefit in either of these, feel free to proceed with them, but do make sure that you follow the guidance there, that we not use contains for applicability and category, and that if you are going to use contained, that you are aware that we are looking for that land unit to fall or be within that layer boundary feature, excuse me. Next, I would like to turn it over and introduce Gay Benfer, Assistant State Conservationist for Programs in Kansas.
All right, thank you, Jenna. So Kansas has used geospatial data in our program ranking since 2003. Our use of it has really developed over time, over the last 20 years, but the ease of use for our field office staff has always been our main focus, our main priority. We started with our own geospatial tools at that time and switched to the CART capabilities when those were released. We've been able to utilize geospatial recommendations such as TMDL areas, core grazing regions, ecological focus areas, recommendations from our state technical committee, from our staff, using those to prioritize our rankings. We do have an internal work group of state, area, and field staff that provide recommendations. Being able to use this data really provides consistency and a time savings for our field staff. Programs in Kansas, we don't do this alone. The communications and the relationships that we have between the program staff with the ranking, our resources staff with planning and assessments, and our technology staff with our business tools, CART and Conservation Desktop. Working together that's integral to how the process works. We really work together closely to make sure that we're using CART as it is intended. Over the past 2 years, we have started to focus on land use-based ranking pools. I think you can see the examples of those on my slide. Using that land use base as part of the standard ranking pool name for ease and recognition. But along with that, making sure within that we are targeting resource concerns and primary practices. The tool and the technology, really being able to use the geospatial data, simplifies and streamlines our ranking process, and it really provides us definitive and defensible data. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chad Volkman. He is our Assistant State Conservationist for Technology.
All right, thank you, Gay, and good day to everyone joining us today on the CD CART forum. For this portion of the presentation, I'll discuss NRCS Kansas data sources and a few items to consider when determining use of geospatial data for program ranking in CART. We have several strong long-term partnerships through the Kansas Technical Committee, and these partnerships provide much of the geospatial data used in Kansas CART ranking. In years prior to the introduction of CART, Kansas has incorporated upwards of 80 geospatial layers in the ranking process, across all financial assistance and easement programs. In more recent years, with the introduction of CART, that number has decreased due to soils data being incorporated into CART assessment at the national level, as Eric shared earlier in today's forum, and that's specifically related to the dynamic thresholds that impact the vulnerability. We removed much of our state level use of soils in the ranking as we determined that to be duplicative. In fiscal year 2024, NRCS Kansas used approximately 70 geospatial questions in CART ranking, and that accounts for about 20% of our total questions for all FA and easement ranking. On the right half of my screen, you can see a partial list of the geospatial data sets and sources that we use, and many of these are authoritative data from our state Kansas agencies. This leads me to my first item we consider when evaluating data for the use in the ranking, and that's who is the authoritative source, and can we receive the data directly from them? We don't want to use data secondhand and that may have been manipulated for an alternative purpose. Due to our ongoing relationship through Kansas Technical Committee, we can work with them as the authoritative source for the next three items I had listed on the left: the metadata, refresh, and scale. Metadata. The authoritative source of the data should be able to provide valuable information in the form of metadata to help you understand its applicability for your program ranking. In recent months, USDA and NRCS have begun to provide policy related to metadata requirements for all data used by NRCS in the ranking process and other areas of our agency workload. And it's critical to have quality metadata as we move forward to meet our agency policy. For refresh, it's a mixed bag on the frequency of refresh for data that we use in Kansas. Some have been used over decades with no change. For example, the Kansas sensitive groundwater areas from our partners at Kansas Geological Survey. Other data sets like ecological focus areas for terrestrial and aquatic wildlife from our partners at Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks may change every 5 years as they refresh the State Wildlife Action Plan. And yet others change every couple of years, like the total maximum daily load or TMDL data. So communication with our partners is critical to ensure that we have the most current and accurate information for use in CART ranking. Some external data sets do change continuously throughout the year, so it's critical that agency policy is followed and all of our CART ranking data sets are stored on our internal geoportal. This ensures program consistency throughout the fiscal year and that the data can be archived at the national level during fiscal year rollover. For scale, it's good to have an understanding of the data, and that's critical to ensure it has been developed for use at the field or the planned land unit scale. And a discussion with the authoritative source or the metadata should provide adequate information on how the data was developed and that it meets your intended purpose for use in CART ranking. Now, for example of an issue we dealt with in Kansas, look at that image in the lower left of the slide. Represented there are several PLUs in yellow and the county boundary represented in black. The county boundary should be at the road center line, however, it's obviously not, and instead it intersects the two PLUs to the south. The county boundary data set may not have been created for our intended purpose or scale, and in this specific example, did previously create CART ranking category issues for Kansas. In rare instances, assessments were placed in the incorrect ranking category, which impacted funds available to other assessments. There are additional internal considerations for your data, so please reach out to your national contact regarding publishing, configuration, and use of geospatial data in CART. Jenna mentioned a couple of these internal considerations, like dissolving the geospatial data for applicability questions, and also ensuring your geospatial data end date in the configuration tool does not expire during the fiscal year. As we transition to the next slide, I'll discuss a web map NRCS Kansas created on the GIS States portal. It pulls data sets from both GIS states and from GeoPortal, where CART ranking data are to be published by states per agency policy. The web map is not a substitute for CART ranking. It is primarily used by field and area staff to visualize the geospatial data that is used by CART ranking. Additionally, the web map is used at Kansas Technical Committee meetings and local work group meetings. The map allows stakeholders to better understand the resources of the state and zoom in on their local region or county to assist as they document recommendations for improvements to program delivery. On the left side of the screen, you can see the list of NRCS Kansas ranking pools. Each of the ranking pools can be expanded to see the applicable geospatial layers. And in the first example, I've expanded the KS FY24 EQIP crop irrigated ranking pool, which contains 4 geospatial data sets from 3 different authoritative sources. Farther down the list, you can see the EQIP range ranking pool expanded and an RCPP ranking pool as well. Now on my last slide, we see an example of the same web map with the EQIP crop irrigated ranking pool data visible and the legend pane open on the left. Users have functionality to zoom and pan, change visible layers, access pop-ups, and for more specific attributes for that layer, and other geospatial functionalities available that would typically find in a web map. Other advantages we've realized with the web maps are flexibility to add layers, quickly printing PDFs, and creating custom labels. There's fewer layers for users to manage in CD, and maybe most importantly, with this standalone web map, is there's no negative impact to CD performance like may have happened if we configured all these data sets for visibility in CD. Now I'd like to turn it over and introduce Levi Gibson, our Kansas Business Tools Coordinator, to discuss some geospatial question examples.
All right, thank you, Chad, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone. I have a handful of example questions here using some of the functionality that Jenna described earlier, and these are just concepts that have worked well for Kansas over the last few years. First, a few best practices that we've implemented just to build consistency for our field staff. We have a number of instances where the same geospatial question is used in multiple ranking pools, and we've tried to standardize those questions where possible so that the question itself and the geospatial analysis are the same across ranking pools. We're adding GIS in brackets to the end of all geospatial questions to the actual question text itself so that our field users can immediately recognize when a question is geospatial. And all geospatial questions in CART have the otherwise choice as the last choice. We've been renaming that choice text on those from otherwise to something more meaningful. And that makes the ranking pool reports and the applicability detail reports a little more clear for both our staff and clients. And finally, we're not always doing this, but in ranking pools with a lot of questions, we've created separate display sections, display group sections for the geospatial and the user answered questions. The remainder of my slides are screenshots from the ranking pool configuration module of CART, which would typically just be accessible to NRCS staff with a business tools coordinator or state program manager role in CD. But if you don't have one of those roles, you might still be interested in the types of geospatial questions that are possible in CART ranking. You may just not see this interface that often. So first, I have an example of an applicability question. When a geospatial applicability question is used, planners will only see the ranking pool if the land unit meets the geospatial criteria, and that's assuming that they also meet the other eligibility criteria of the ranking pool. So in this example, we have a working lands, or we've had a working lands for wildlife initiative for the lesser prairie chicken. Kansas planners only see this ranking pool in CART if the assessment exists within the applicability boundary. And then when building a geospatial applicability question, we've found it important to keep providing clarification on the land unit qualification that Jenna described earlier, just to ensure that everybody stays on the same page about whether that's any or all in that qualification. And you'll notice here that we've renamed the otherwise choice to not applicable. Next is an example of a geospatial category question. We have a ranking pool addressing plant pest pressure on rangeland, and within that there are 4 core areas that each receive their own initial allocation. These core areas are where we still have intact grasslands with a low level of woody vegetation encroachment, and there's an effort to defend these cores from invasive woody plants. You can see here that the otherwise category has been renamed Rest of Kansas, as that's functionally what it means if we have an assessment that's not within one of the 4 core areas. And that choice text, since it also becomes the category names in the Select Application Tool, or SAT, renaming that otherwise just provides more clarity for our program managers. The next example here is an example of a percent intersect question, determining if at least 50% of a PLU is within a source water protection area. You'll notice the GIS in brackets at the end of the question text, as I mentioned earlier. And one common point of confusion on the percent intersect questions is that the geospatial analysis is being run on each individual land unit. So if at least one land unit meets the geospatial analysis, then the assessment is awarded the points. It's not analyzing 50% of the total acres in the assessment. We've just found it important to keep providing clarity on that point. And again, we've renamed the otherwise choice in this example. Here's an example of a priority level question. So again, this is a 50% minimum intersect question. Choice 1 being class 1 of this particular data set, and choice 2 being class 2. But what if a land unit straddles 2 or more priority areas? So in this example, what if 30% of the land unit acres are in class 1 and 30% are in class 2? Neither is 50%, so using the previous methodology would result in a false negative from CART. So on next slide, in box A on the right, this is a screenshot from GeoPortal of this data set's attributes. The first column is actually a text attribute. You'll see a number there. In this case, they're numbers, but in many data sets, this might be something like high, medium, or low, or priority 1, priority 2, etc. The second column is an integer value that corresponds with the text. So this example is straightforward, but with another data set, you might have something like high is 1, medium is 2, and low is 3, etc. And then in box B, the first choice is configured as a 50% minimum intersect, where that integer value equals 1. And then finally in box C, the second choice is configured as a 50% minimum, where the integer value is less than or equal to 2. And so that way our 30% class 1 and 30% class 2 land unit would be awarded points at the class 2 level. Again, that's on a land unit basis, not the whole assessment. So we've just found it important to keep being clear on that point for these questions. The next example is a 2-part question. So we start with a geospatial question that determines if the land unit intersects one of those previously discussed grassland initiative core areas, but no points are assigned to this question. Then in a second text-based question, this question is set to be conditionally dependent upon the answer to the geospatial question, and points are assigned to this question. In this scenario, we don't want to award points for we don't just want to award points for assessments in the geospatial boundary. We also want to promote unbroken sod within these areas. So the net effect is that a land unit has to meet the geospatial criteria, and it has to meet the user entered response relating to the other planning considerations to receive the points. Finally, this is an example using multiple data sets. This is an easement program ranking question determining if an offer area is within a half mile of a stream or if it includes a playa wetland. In Kansas, that's largely a Western Kansas versus Eastern Kansas distinction, but a land unit could certainly meet both criteria. But the requirement was for this to be or. We didn't want to make separate questions and potentially stack points for land units that met both criteria. So we actually have 4 data sets here, and we can go to the next slide. So we have 4 data sets here. We have smaller streams in a line data set, large streams and rivers in a polygon data set, water bodies, lakes and farm ponds in a separate polygon layer, and then finally the playa layer. CART will process from top down and stop once one of these meet, and each of these are assigned the same number of points. So you could functionally achieve the same thing through a series of conditional questions, but this way is simpler to configure and simpler to explain to the end users. So those are the examples I had to share today. This is by no means an exhaustive list of uses for geospatial data in CART, but just some types of questions that have worked well for us in Kansas. So thank you for the opportunity to share, and I will turn it over to Travis Romey to share with us about national data available.
All right, thanks, Levi. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the national geospatial data resources. So the first slide here. Okay. As you can see, back in fiscal year 21, we had basically 700 geospatial services used in the ranking questions. And obviously, the first year that we had CART available was in 2019, and it was kind of late in the year. So obviously, you can see that we've increased our numbers every year since we've started this. And so in February of 2024, we took a snapshot and looked to see kind of what we have going on. We have 997 geospatial services being utilized today, and all of those should be underneath GeoPortal, where we house all of our information. There's 2,858 geospatial ranking questions as of February of this last year. So there may have been more that came up later on in the fiscal year, but that's how many we had at that point. So if you look at the breakdown of the types of questions, Jenna talked a lot about applicability. And obviously, applicability is kind of used to determine if the land units are within some specified area of interest, like a watershed, a state, a service center, a priority for some resource concern, like work and lands for wildlife priority areas. So you can see that the bulk, actually the majority, are applicability questions. But there's also obviously a pretty good split between category, resources, and program type ranking questions that are also being asked. So this is looking at all data, not just national data sets being utilized, but this is all data sets being utilized within CART for geospatial ranking. So let's take a look at some of the national layers. So if we look at the, we finally are starting to get some stats on some of these services and their usage, which has been really good and eye-opening. So we've got some additional software that we didn't have available in the past that we can start pulling some information about, well, just how many times are these geospatial data layers being hit. And so if you look at these 7 services, which these are 7 of the more used national services that we have available, you can see that we had over 7 million hits just in the month of February. And that really equated to, and we're kind of trying to come up with, well, how many is that per minute? And so we're using an assumption that we've got an 18-hour active day across those 20 work days. And just looking at these 7 services, it looks like about 325 hits per minute. Now we know that because certain times of the day there's going to be peaks. So midday, right, everybody's on, all users are on across the country, and so that number is probably greatly is much more than that when we think about well just how many are being hit like at 12 noon Central Time, when we've got the East Coast and the West Coast and everybody's on there. So just to give you an idea of how often these services are being hit. It's just kind of it was a eye opener to us just to kind of get a look at some of this information. So let's look at some additional layers. So this next slide looks at these additional services. There's about 70, I think we have 7 plus or minus services that are nationally configured for use within CART. And this is a pretty good chunk of them right here. And you can see that, again, during this February timeframe, we had about 2.3 million hits. So, approximately, again, 100 hits per minute, which, again, if you think about, peak times, it's probably much higher than that. But you can kind of get an idea of how many of these things and how much this data is being used. This obviously is another good way of looking at, well, what data layers are being utilized a lot. So you can see, obviously, the Clean Air Act particle layers being hit 1 million times. You can see that, so that's heavily used. Obviously, some of these, some like the Working Lands for Wildlife layers, obviously are going to be limited, right, because they're just in certain areas of the country. So some of the more national layers are going to be utilized, obviously more than others. And I will say that there's more data being added. So even just this last week, there's a couple of pollinator layers that show need for pollinators, more need for pollinator habitat within certain areas that are going to be created and well, they are created, that are going to be uploaded and configured. So every year we add to this set of data to help states obviously utilize some of these national geospatial layers and services that can help with the ranking process for our programs. Okay, so let's look at the next slide here. So we've had this CART geospatial page. Actually, I think it came up in 2019. I think it even says something like December of 2019. So it was built early on, and it has not been updated. So Crystal Runge, who's on the conservation planning staff, she wasn't able to attend today. She's out doing some additional training. But she is going to be working on this CART geospatial page that we have and bringing some updates to it. And it's obviously very much needed as we move forward. And so that is one thing that she's going to be trying to get done this next year. There's some other priorities. I think we'll go on to the next slide, which talks a little bit about this document that was generated or created again back in 2019 and has not really been updated. So it has some of the data in there, has links within this document to those data layers, but many of the links are not up to date because the document has not been maintained. And so now that Crystal is on working with us, she's going to take on that priority, and that's her first priority, is to get our geospatial national geospatial data assets documented in this with links to this information. I will say that there are some things obviously going on with AWS migration to the GeoPortal moving. And so part of this obviously is going to be being updated as we move over to AWS. So those, obviously all those service URLs that you're configuring today in Conservation Desktop for your questions, those will be changing. Now, obviously, the configuration itself, it's not going to have an impact. I think that was maybe one of the questions too, but it's not going to have an impact as far as when you move that data over and it has a new URL. Just both systems will be up at the same time. You will have to go in and update your configuration to point to that. And I would, obviously advise that if you're going to make, you wouldn't want to make any changes to your data, but as we do move that data over into AWS, we will be obviously updating the configuration in CD, but it shouldn't have an impact on your ranking questions per se, because as long as everything falls in, and we will be providing obviously information on specifically on that workflow for migrating to Esri AWS, to the AWS services. Next slide, I think, is just an example of what's within this document. And so it shows obviously these national data layers, and it has the links within it. So this is what's going to be being updated as we have time to get that done here in the very near future. I think that's all I have at this point. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jenna Morse so she can talk some about the fiscal year 25 CART ranking timeline and new features.
Thank you so much, Travis. So just want to take the opportunity to present some of the updates that are coming with the next fiscal year. A few of these actually that we're going to start with were released midsummer, but to prepare for fiscal year 25, I thought it was important to highlight these again, as they may not have been as useful or ready, available for your use this fiscal year. But in the second step of the interim ranking pool matching process, we do have that geospatial step. And so one of the updates that we made was to the statuses. Typically or historically, only the era status was a hyperlink that you could select to get additional context or details. Well, now we've added where when we get a success or a geospatial not met, you'll be able to click those statuses to get additional information to help you communicate better about what is meeting a ranking pool or the reasons why you're getting that geospatial applicability not met. So when you click the link, it's going to initiate a dialogue that's going to be titled Applicability Geospatial Question Details, and that's going to show you what pool you're looking in, the state and display group name, along with what the survey and survey section, the question text that was part of that evaluation, and what each of the choice or responses were in response to that. And it'll provide additional details about that geospatial definition so that you'll have a better understanding as to why you're getting the results that you're getting. And also in the case where there are no geospatial questions in that ranking pool, instead of getting content listed there, you will see a message that no geospatial questions are present. So new functionality that CART's going to be permitting program managers to identify ranking pools with tags. Again, this came out midsummer. However, because it was mid-year, we had to code in on certain pools that were Act Now with the Act Now tag. But now not many states probably went in to actually use the edit functionality to add a tag to a pool. So now that we're going into the new fiscal year, as you're building ranking pools, I wanted you to be aware that this is available functionality for you. These tags are beneficial in our reporting or for reporting purposes. Currently, there are 3 available, but we can add additionals as needed. So if you find use for tags in your state that are not available, you can pass those along, and as they make them up to us, we can have conversation and get decisions on whether to incorporate those into the tool. Additionally, program managers now have the ability to control, we can go back one, Eric, control when we're going to allow facilitating practices to match to a ranking pool if they're linked to an existing practice. And in order to do so, under the tag section there on the slide, we did incorporate a checkbox to include existing practices. So if you have a ranking pool where you want to allow for existing practices to pull in supporting practices on a ranking pool, you'll have to select that indicator. There are going to be specific pools where we cannot use this functionality, and so that's why we had to add this step in to provide some controls there for us. So this functionality allows planners to recognize system practices when related to a practice that has already been completed. So again, by marking include existing practices while you're building or editing a ranking tool will allow us to utilize this capability. Next. All right. Thanks, Eric. So this is going to show what users will see as they're going through the assessment step. So planners now will have that ability to acknowledge whether the supporting practice is being linked to a planned primary practice or an existing primary practice. If the pool does allow for the existing practice to be included, then it's going to pull in that facilitating practice. And when you view your applicability details, you'll be able to see that that supporting practice or facilitating practice is showing included in the ranking pool. And you'll also have an indication of what practice or what existing practice that facilitating practice is supporting. Excuse me. Okay, next. All right, and so in response to feedback that we received from users, this new capability will allow program managers to identify which practice narratives are going to be permitted through the ranking pool matching process. This functionality provides benefits to users by ensuring that the appropriate planned practice narrative is being considered for funding. A good example this year, planning guidance was issued for IRA identified, identified specific practice narratives to meet the intent of IRA funding. But now through this functionality, ranking pools will be able to establish based on this criteria to minimize the errors that we were seeing in contracting. So as you're building your ranking pools or as you're reviewing your ranking pools, if you have narratives included in a pool that you don't intend to be there, this is a perfect opportunity to put those controls in to kind of limit what's allowed to match to your pool. And I gave IRA as an example because we do want to make sure that we adhere to the planning guidance that was issued so that we are funding contracts that are meeting the purpose of that funding. And Eric did share that we do get the efficiency calculation. It does start, information does feed in from the assessment step. One change that we did make as a result of some invalidation issues we were seeing this past fiscal year, we did make a change to the efficiency calculation. And so, excuse me. So to alleviate those concerns, when practice cost data is being updated during the fiscal year, we don't want to continue to see those impacts to our ranking pool or to our ranking scores. And so in order to get us to a place of better consistency, we did update that to change the formula so that we're no longer using the practice average annual cost in the calculation. We now have a practice efficiency factor, and it is assigned at each practice narrative. So this should allow us some better controls as we're going through the ranking period, not to see those fluctuations in scores as a result of changes that were needed for other purposes. Excuse me. And for our fiscal year 25 timeline, just some updates are be aware. Ranking guidance for fiscal year 25 is currently under review, and we're hoping to have that pretty early in the fiscal year. Upon fiscal year rollover, our national program managers are going to be going into CART, and they're going to be making any necessary edits to ranking templates. One big change that I was asked to share is that we are going to go back to separate national templates for IRA. And this is to make sure that we are indeed contracting the correct practices. And so this is a good way for us to control, because we can limit what practices are available to even be included in a ranking pool before it is developed at the state level. And so putting these controls in place will help us to ensure that we are spending those funds according to what the authority allows. And just so you're aware, states will be notified of all the changes that are going to be coming forth for FY25, as well as the updates, the changes that are being made to templates, as well as updates to the ranking guidance. We will be covering that on the next FAPD call, which is scheduled for October 8th. So if we can't answer your questions here today, tune into that session and we'll have more information to help you get through, get set up for fiscal year 25. And I will hand the baton to Christy for question and answers.
All right. Thank you to Jenna and all the speakers. We do have questions coming in, so we'll take as many as we can. So we did get a couple of questions on the slides, and we are going to be sharing those slides. So all the participants after the call will get an email from me with a link to the We Are NRCS SharePoint site, and that'll have the information from everything we've done. So we'll have slides, we'll download the video because within the meeting, it's only available for 6 months. And then any other reference materials that's been mentioned will all be posted there, and we'll send that out with a feedback survey that we'd like for you to complete after we're done. All right, we'll go ahead and jump into the first questions. Eric is the first one up. So can you talk about how the number of resource concerns a planner selects for assessment may impact overall ranking score?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So in regards to the number of resource concerns a planner selects in the assessment, it's really going to be highly dependent on how your ranking pools are configured in your state. So what I mean by that is if your ranking pools in the state have broad applicability in regards to a lot of resource concerns are applicable to the ranking pool. So you've prioritized a long list of resource concerns for that ranking pool to provide funds to address. Then there's going to be greater influence than if you have configured narrow ranking pools for a smaller subset of resource concerns, and also concurrently with planned practices. And what that's going to do is if you have, assessment A, let's say it has 20 resource concerns, assessment B, 3 or 5, when they go in competition against each other in a large configured, lots of resource concerns, lots of planned practices, there's going to be an advantage for that assessment A if it has a lot of resource concerns that match up to a lot of resource concerns that are applicable in the ranking pool. And then your B with maybe 5 resource concerns can only match up to 5. However, if you look at a narrow configured, so I think Gay and Chad and others talked about, working with their state technical committees. And if you have a narrow focus that you want to provide financial assistance for, which is a narrow list of resource concerns that those financial funds are focused for, your A assessment with 20 resource concerns, it's always good to evaluate what's going on out there. But if it matches a smaller subset of resource concerns at a narrow ranking pool, then we're going to have a more even playing field between assessment A and B focused narrowly with that ranking pool. So it's highly dependent on how your state has set up configuration. And you're also going to be looking at how those 5 ranking factors have been weighted. So each one of those 5 have a ranking factor. If you've set a ranking percentage for vulnerability very low, it's also going to help diminish that. But it may be advisable to set it at a high vulnerability if you want the assessment to kind of tease out those resource concerns with the greatest need so you can focus your financial incentive payments to help address those.
All right, thank you, Eric. Next up is questions for Jenna. Can CART or CD run a report based on geospatial boundaries, such as all practices inside this analysis layer in fiscal year 24?
Currently, there is not a user report available for CART to run a report of this nature, but it is on our enhancement list for consideration. If you could provide me some additional information or a separate email, we can see about getting that information for you.
All right, thank you. And another question for Jenna. There will be an enterprise portal upgrade, which will impact all geospatial layers published in CD and CART in fiscal year 25 when that upgrade happens. You mentioned it's important to have the data layers operational for the entire ranking process. How will that impact our use of CART in fiscal year 25? Is there a mitigation plan for disruption to our planners?
I will tackle what happens if the geospatial data is corrupted during the fiscal year. It will discontinue that ranking pool from showing available for matching. So that's the reason that we were stressing about making sure that we ensure our dates are not going to end before the fiscal year does, because it will impact your ability to rank. In terms of this upgrade, if I would ask Travis to hop on if I'm misinterpreting or misunderstood what he stated, but I believe this is the same upgrade that he was referencing, where he did not expect it to have a negative impact on CD or CART for this fiscal year.
Yeah, that is true. I do not expect it to. I mean, it will be work, but it is not. It should not have a negative impact as long as we follow a procedure to make those updates as we need to. And we still don't know for sure. We're expecting that, but we have not done the testing yet. We're just starting to get ready to test the new AWS services in production to make sure that we can migrate there safely. But as we move forward, we're expecting that to go well, and there will be guidance that goes out on that migration. And it doesn't have to be all done at one time. So I'd say as we move forward, we can parse it out into the pieces that need to get done.
All right, thank you. Okay, another question for Jenna. If a ranking question is asking for a 1, 5, and 10 mile distance from something, and the reference geospatial layer is a multi-part feature with 3 ring buffers at each of those 1, 5, and 10 mile distances, can each of those ring buffers be allocated individual ranking scores, even though they're all in a single layer?
This could be possible if set up properly. And my advice would be to test this use case in the training environment, just to make sure that that you're evaluated in a proper order sequence to ensure that the points are being allotted correctly. But if someone else wants to jump in and add to, feel free.
Just real quickly, I think so. It depends on, so if it's attributed, typically, right, if it's a multi-part polygon and you have a 10 meter or 10 mile, I guess in this case, and you have a 5 mile and a 1 mile, and you've got those merged into, you've got a 5 mile ring and a 1 mile ring and a 10 mile ring. As long as they're attributed, then you can set your ranking questions to use the intersect analysis by a attribute, right? And so that's how I think you would do it. But Jen is right on. You want to test this in training. You put it in training and test it and make sure it's going to work for you.
All right, anyone else want to answer that? Chad, you can come off mute if you want.
Yeah, I would just add an additional part of that is as the data is evaluated, it moves down through the answers in the question. So question 1 is always evaluated first. So if you wanted the 1 mile buffer to be evaluated initially, then you need to have that as question 1 or answer 1 in your question. And then the 5 mile is answer 2, and then the 10 mile is answer 3. If you had a scenario where you're using an intersect, and that PLU intersected the 1 mile buffer and the 10 mile buffer in any way, you would want to make sure you had those configured correctly in the correct order. So.
All right, thank you. Okay, so next we have a question that I think will go to both Chad and Travis, and y'all feel free to answer, whoever wants to answer first. Who has the authority to alter CD cart data? Is this specifically on a state level? Is there a standardized process or a system to peer review the data that's entered? So there's a lot of questions there, and I guess whoever wants to take it first.
Yeah, I shared with Travis, I'd start off with this. So there is a CD data configuration permission that at the state level a user needs to have. Typically, that's going to be your state GIS specialist that would use that permission to configure your data for use in CD and CART, visibility in CD and for processing in CART, geospatial processing in the ranking. As far as the peer review process, we're working with our partners in Kansas, the Kansas Technical Committee. We come to an agreement that those data sets would be used in ranking, and ultimately those recommendations go on to the state conservationist for final approval. Those data sets are reviewed by multiple NRCS staff, whether it's on programs or maybe something dealing with range. Our state range conservationist would be reviewing that data along with the state resource con. So as Gay mentioned, the communication and the collaboration across multiple staffs is involved there. There's also tools that National has provided in the past that evaluate the data's complexity, or does it have too many vertices? There's criteria that, and I believe Travis can speak to that in more detail, but those tools in the past have been very handy to make sure that our data, the way it's built, will allow CART to run at a good performance. Travis, I guess the last point I had was test it in training. Jenna mentioned that. I think Travis has mentioned that already. Test your data there to make sure it's functioning correctly. And Travis, I'll turn it over to you for anything else.
Okay. Yeah, I think that pretty much covered it. So the way we try to limit, the changes is by having that zero authorization for doing configuration. And I think Chad hit it, exactly right, is that obviously the conversation between the program staff who's managing the ranking questions typically and the GIS person who's managing, or typically the GIS person who's managing the geospatial data, they need to be working together, obviously. We obviously try not to make changes during the fiscal year or do not because of having to re-rank things. And so when you run into these issues where there is miscommunication, it's kind of a bad deal. So obviously those preliminary meetings where you're discussing this data layer is going to be utilized and everybody has visibility into that data layer, and Chad and their group showed that nice web map that they have. It's a good way of doing it. I've done similar things at a national level, is creating web maps for the Working Lands for Wildlife folks to make sure that, and I've actually sent emails to the groups to say, okay, please make sure that the service that I've published on your behalf, is actually is actually meeting your needs. And so that's kind of the checks, but there's not really a at this point, like some form or something that you fill out. It really is, up to you to work together to make sure that all the parties that are involved in creating that ranking question and provisioning the data are working together to make that happen.
All right, thank you. Next question goes to Eric. Is there a way to override or enter wind and erosion water data? This question has always been answered geospatially, but it would be helpful to enter some data when we do see erosion out in the field.
Sure. So another great question. So thank you for it. So in the assessment with sheet and reel erosion as your resource concern component, that threshold is going to be dynamic. It's going to be set based on erodibility, rainfall factors. The evaluation of the level of sheet and reel erosion on that existing condition is going to be set by those existing practices that you identify and the answers to the resource inventory questions. So if that result, existing condition or the plan condition, you believe as a user is incorrect, on the results page is where you can override that result. And you can do an override at the existing total or at the plan total. When you do an override, though, just be aware that you won't see a numerical value change. But what you are doing is disagreeing with the results. So in your scenario, it was we still seen erosion. So you would take a met condition, so something that is shown resource concern is at the numerical value or above the threshold, and you're going to say, I disagree. This is a not met situation. And we'll gather that information and see if there's any trends where we need to make adjustments on our side. But that's where you would document the override.
All right, thank you, Eric. We do have a couple questions and then we'll have to let everybody go. So thanks for all the good questions out there. Jenna is the next one. So how many categories can a ranking pool have? Can categories in the same ranking pool be a mix of both text and user answered or user answered and geospatial?
Okay, so for question 1, there is not a limit for the number of categories that you can have in a ranking pool. However, I would remind you that there is a limit to the number of characters that can be in the category name for that information to translate over to SAT. And then for question 2, regarding categories having both a text-based question and a geospatial question, the category section should be a single question. So you will need to decide if it's going to be text-based or geospatial. Where you do have the multi-availability is in the answers.
All right, thank you, thank you. And I know we didn't get to all the questions that you have. We are going to be sending out a question and answer to make sure we capture all those answers for everyone, especially those that weren't able to join live. But that's all the time we have today. We hope this session has been informative. After the meeting, like I said, we're going to email everybody a feedback form. You're going to get the link to the slides. You'll get the questions and answers. And also, we want you to share any thoughts on recommendations for future topics and enhancements. Hope to see you on October 16th to hear about new features coming in CD and CART for fiscal year 25. This concludes our user forum. Thanks for attending.